Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're, of course, going to have another incredible episode for you guys. So we got a couple of different topics to talk about. So I am going to begin, and it is a favorite topic, but it's coming from a unique direction this time. Liberals seem to have a civil war fantasy of their own, or they have a desire to wipe away Red America from power and oppress them and put them away. And there was a Time magazine cover put out over the weekend about Lincoln, and it's like saying how Lincoln, it shows the example of how to unite our country. And for those who may be history buffs, Lincoln launched a war that cost over 700,000 American lives to keep America united. I guess that might be the example. But the article written by John Meacham, who is a popular American historian and journalist, he has got a bunch of biographies, I think, of Andrew Jackson, Thomas Jefferson, George H.W. Bush. He's one of these if you ever go to an airport bookstore, you'll see a John Meacham book there. He is one of those guys. He used to be pretty moderate, but over Trump, he's become very much of a libtard. You'll always see him on MSNBC complaining about Republicans and conservatives. So in this article, he's talking about how, which reiterates a lot of the points you see from the left on how there's a threat to democracy. They keep talking about how there's some type of change in America where we're no longer respecting democracy anymore, and we have to save democracy. But there's one side that it's a threat to this democracy. And of course, this is echoing what Joe Biden said in his MAGA Republican speech, saying MAGA Republicans are a direct threat to our democracy and we have to deal with them. And this is just a journalist repeating those talking points in an article trying to celebrate Lincoln, as Lincoln is a forerunner to the type of liberalism we see today. The one thing this Time article doesn't note is that Meacham himself meets with Biden and is sometimes a speechwriter for Biden. So he is once again conveying as like, oh, I'm just an objective observer. This is the take from the Biden administration. This is someone who advises Biden. This is someone who writes his speeches. This is somebody who may have even had a hand in that Dark Brandon speech from a few weeks ago. Or really, maybe even a few months ago. Time flies by when you're being base, when you're being keyed. And he may have even helped write that speech. And this is some guy saying like, well, we have to, really uphold Lincoln's example. Now, one thing is like, what is Lincoln's example that he talks about? He doesn't talk about him eliminating habeas corpus. He doesn't talk about him waging war on something. He just like says, oh, he really just spoke to the better aspects of our nature. He really spoke about liberty and equality, and that's really what we need. We need that firm hand to really remind us of our American values, to bring us together as one nation and to cast aside this grave threat to democracy. And the article is a part of this growing sentiment on the left that there is just that the right itself poses this massive threat to our democracy. I've talked about this a lot, and this is a lot of conservatives have talked about this, but it is very curious because one, Republicans are not in power. They're not in power, but you always would think if you turn on MSNBC that, if they win the midterms, their democracy is on the edge. Like it may be over for democracy if the Republicans win the midterms. And they've been doing this rhetoric even last year when they're saying this may be the end of democracy if Republicans do well in the midterms. Why? Just trust us. And it's like, what are they doing? They're passing voter reform laws. And they would always point out the stuff what they did in Georgia, which is like restricting how mail-in ballots are counted or cast, that this is somehow making American democracy teeter on the edge. And it is like very ahistorical. I mean, like the thing is these guys are supposed historians, like John Meacham, Michael Bleschloss, these guys who advise Biden and are mostly responsible for a lot of this rhetoric on there. They all claim to have studied American history. Yet they somehow seem that like throughout American history that every person just came to the ballot box, they put it in, and there was this is what it was. There's a sanctity to it. And they still even imagine that today, where they imagine that all these like ghettos out in the urban cities like Philadelphia and elsewhere, that everyone's like, oh, time for do my citizen duty, and they go and walk to the polls. They forget that there's like ballot harvesting is now a part of this. That this type of voter fraud has been apparent in American history for at least probably 200 years. I mean, ever since the urban machines were there was always this type of fraudulent behavior, especially when it came to cities where they would just like stuff ballot boxes. They get people who are not even on the voter, people who are dead to say they're voting. And if you look at any election in history or that these people were just lined up to vote and they didn't even know who they're voting for. And we even see this today as a work of these urban democratic machines where they just like ballot harvest. There's mostly, I have to think about how like Romney in several precincts in Philadelphia in 2012 like won no votes. And it was really just shoddy type of election work that they were doing, that they didn't even bother to have any ballots cast for Romney. And that's how like American democracy works. But for all of these people, they imagine it as a bourgeois white experience, but they imagine that it's now like diverse. It's like every person just like walking out of their home. It's like, I'm making an informed decision today, and nobody's influencing my vote. I'm not a part of any big city machine or like how votes are cast. I just looked up the opinions of every politician and weighed the choices, and I'm going with whoever I'm picking. And so that's like the impression that they like to convey. And now they convey the fact that Republicans are going to tell all these minorities, like, no, you're not going to count their vote. They're going to have the MAGA patrol outside of polling precincts, and they're just like, nope, you're banned from voting. And like, what about my vote? And it's just because they're making it, they're putting stricter limitations on mail-in balloting. But they keep saying this, and they keep saying that it's like a direct threat to our democracy, that this is. And this is repeated ad nauseum. And they truly believe that our democracy may be over if the Republicans win the midterms. I would take that. I don't know if truly believe, but they've made their supporters believe that. And the funny thing about all this concern for democracy is that the solutions for this democratic threat are not very democratic, or not democratic at all. And they want to, the main goal that they want is they want to arrest people for questioning elections. They want to arrest people for hate speech. They want to arrest people for not following the latest in COVID lockdowns. They just want to arrest people for a wide variety of reasons to restore our democracy. So maybe that is a very Lincoln solution to the issue, is that we clamp down and persecute the opposition and wage war against them. Not quite the war of the Civil War, but a metaphorical war on the enemies of democracy, and we put them in jail and then eliminate their presence from public life. And that's how we solve the issue. And so that's always the means for this, is that they all want Trump in jail. They want his allies in jail. They want the Republican Party banished from the halls of democracy. And then like it's all given over to Liz Cheney to remake the GOP in an image that is pro-democracy. And that is what the Democratic vision is about upending American democracy in order to restore some type of semblance of normalcy. But the requirement to get to that point is beyond the means, is clearly abnormal. Before I get into another point, I do want to say is that the idea, the article makes clear is like everyone's like, there's all this support for upcoming civil war. Is a civil war on the horizon? Does this rhetoric really indicate a type of civil war? And no, not really. As I always emphasize, because it is one side hyping itself into hysteria and them having the power to actually do something, and then the other side doesn't really have recourse to institutions or the previous track record of actually, going out and showing the type of resistance that they have. In large part because the federal government comes down far harder on right-wing protests than they do with left-wing protests. Compare the response of the BLM riots to J6, and that's all you need to know. And so I don't think it's more that the left is far more eager to wield power to achieve ends that most people would have said a few years ago is anti-democratic, illiberal, and goes against our constitutional principles. And I always want to say is that the real threat to our government or to the republic is not a right-wing Caesar coming to power, which some on the right are really actually a lot on the left believe is like a bad thing, and a lot on the right believe is like a good thing, as that's going to happen, is that we're going to have a right-wing Caesar. But our culture, our institutions are not made for that. They're not ready to go over for that. What they are ready for is a left-wing Caesar who will come in, say, there is this anti-democratic threat to us, and they're going to destroy America unless we do something about that. And I demand absolute power to do this. And I'm going to suspend habeas corpus. I'm going to pass hate crime or hate speech laws. And I'm going to, arrest people who say mean things on Twitter. And I'm going to ban racism. And I'm going to, any judge who gets in my way, I'm going to immediately remove them from office and possibly put them in jail. And I'm going to use the military and the federal law enforcement to go after these dire threats to our republic. And they probably wouldn't even, they don't say republic, only the right says republic, but our democracy. And these institutions would go along with it 100%, like CNN, the administrative state, the deep state, even the Pentagon, all of them there'd be probably a lot of people uncomfortable with this, but if there was somebody charismatic selling it, and maybe there had been some incident, maybe there was like a new January 6th or something of that sort, and he had his Reichstag fire to use as a motivation tool to get what he wants to obtain that power, then you could very well have a left-wing Caesar. I mean, we are primed for that moment. And all this stuff about the threats to democracy and the hysteric nature, and then looking to Lincoln and how he's the solution to this, this is more priming the left to be more authoritarian and this is an irony, is like the more they complain about democracy or how we're losing democracy, the more they want to make America undemocratic and tyrannical. That is the goal that they're going with. So it's not about democracy at all. It's just about pursuing their own power. And now I'm going to go into a similar point about, and people always like to talk about the polarization and what we should do. There was an interesting point brought up by this guy, Shadi Hamid. Or it's apparently Shadi Hamid. Who cares? We'll just call him Hamid. He was on one of the Sunday news talk shows, or one of those panelist shows on basic cable. And he was talking about how all their panel had Jen Psaki on there and other luminaries of that sort on there. And they're talking about how, dangerous democracy is, and the Trump voters are so bad, the MAGA Republicans threat. And Mr. Hamid was simply said this point that you can't wish away the 74 million Trump voters. They're going to be in this country whether you like it or not. And we just have to learn to live with that and tolerate them in order to have a country. Now, there's a point there. He was simply trying to be nicer to Trump supporters and in some ways push back against the Democratic extremism that wants them deported or put in concentration camps or democracy camps, as they would probably call them, and that they're eliminated from the public, or that they are just brainwashed and indoctrinated into abandoning all their views. And they're yeah, I guess that's true with him. But the point of the matter is, it's a guy named Shadi Hamid, and I tweeted this, is a guy named Shadi Hamid who is saying that these people, the 74 million Trump voters, many of them their families have been here since before there was a country here, and then them saying that, we view you as interlopers and as a major problem, but we're going to be nice to you and tolerate you as the real Americans, as Mr. Hamid and others view themselves as the fake Americans instead are the Trump voters. The real Americans are the diverse, multicultural America as represented by Shadi Hamid. And that's his underlying point there. And Mr. Hamid got very mad at my tweet, and he's saying how, serious question, are you saying I'm not a real American because my name's Shadi Hamid? Well, what's wrong with that name? and he was going off about that, and like, there's no such thing as founding stock, and you can't, like, it's about commitment to ideas, and immigrants are more committed to the American idea than the native born, yada yada yada. It's all the same crap that they talk about with that. But there was a point brought up by somebody else. There's another person who's like a Middle Eastern guy. I think his name is like Murtaza. I forget the last name. And he brought up this point in saying that, like, well, they could be true Americans because we're now going to be like Rome. He was trying to say it's like the Roman Republic, but it's not the Roman Republic. It's more Imperial Rome. And how just like a commitment to the polity as it exists now is the real loyalty, as everyone who's here has to be just one with the polity as it exists. But that's not how Imperial Rome worked. Imperial Rome was about loyalty to the imperial institutions, such as the emperor and the army, and that is what was the imperial identity. It was a multicultural polyglot empire where they were just opening up. Eventually, they kept opening up citizenship to everyone, and there was really nothing connecting Romans except for the empire itself. But the empire was no longer a republic. It was ruled by, people did not have the ability to really determine what the empire was going to do. There's a certain level of tyranny to the empire, and they could do as they willed. It was not a Republican form of government anymore. The Senate was a useless body that could easily be overridden. But that brings up a point that as America becomes less homogenous, less connected to the republic, to the old republic, less connected to that founding stock, and just more diverse, and the only thing that unites the country is a commitment to abstract ideas, and there's no real depth of culture. I mean, of course, we have Marvel movies and the NFL. And there's not the type of heritage and culture where people like have a sense of who they are, where they belong, and this long line of connection to the people who made the country. Instead, what connects them is a love of Spider-Man or whatever. And that's completely different from how Roman national feeling was in the Republican days, where, they saw themselves as the descendants of Romulus and Remus. They saw themselves as the inheritors of this grand idea that must be preserved, and they strongly saw themselves as Romans. And as the Roman Empire expanded to include a whole lot of people, and a lot of these people were definitely not Roman, and their only connection was like paying taxes to the empire, they had a more tyrannical form of government. And I think that's going to be the similar way with the American Empire, is that as they are more committed that you have to be 100% aligned with whatever ideological precept that the liberals put forward, that's always what they say. It's like, what being American is about being your commitment to these ideas and this ideology, which is not a very good way to set up a country, because people are going to disagree a lot about ideas and ideology. There has to be something more to that. It's like your family. It's not like, in this family, we are all committed to this idea. No, you're a part of that family because of blood, because of and the fact that you're actually related to one another, and that you have this long history together. That's what makes a family. It's not families aren't brought together by commitment to an idea. They're brought together by shared ancestry, and that is the same with most countries. Is that they have this long history together, a culture that they share, and the same heritage and ancestry. And that's what makes countries. A commitment to idea, an ideological nation is something like the Soviet Union. It's like where everyone is just there committed to the workers' paradise and the workers and the eventual triumph of the proletariat. And look at the Soviet Union now. It no longer exists. It was broken down. It died in part due to the rising nationalism of the peoples that made it up. And America feels that it can triumph where no other empire has done before, by being completely subscribed to this ideological conception of itself, where what makes you an American is your commitment to, equality or liberty. But the ones who determine this ideology are liberal elites. And if they say that you're not fully committed to this idea, as they like to say of Trump supporters, and that's why they're a threat to democracy, because they somehow do not align with what democracy means, then they should punish and persecute you. And thus, there's going to be more actions against dissidents when you have nothing to unite the people outside of some commitment to abstract idea that you have to pledge allegiance to all the time. And if you don't agree with the liberal elite's conception of this idea, then you are an enemy deserving of persecution. And that is going to be the nature of the American Empire. It's much more along the lines of Imperial Rome. A lot of people like the Roman Empire. I mean, there's obviously very cool things that it did. But it was also, it was tyrannical. It was, trying to throw all these people together and multicultural and mixed. And it really lost its sense of identity. That's why in the later part of the empire, they were trying to find ways to unite the empire, such as through Christianity. And a lot of these means didn't even work out. And we saw, eventually collapse. And it can no longer provide law and order and defend its borders. And you could see that, people will stay aligned with the system as long as it provides a semblance of law and order and, government services, as long as things are not totally collapsing, as long as it's if somebody just people just can't rape and murder your whole neighborhood and there are going to be people that are going to prevent that or to punish those who do that and to provide basic services. As long as the government can do that, people are still going to be connected to the system. We're not going to have that type of national divorce that people point out. Somebody was tweeting about how we'll divide along cultural affinities. And I joked it would be one region would be for Marvel fans, another region for Star Wars fans, and things like that. And it's not even so much of a joke. It's the real cultural affinities. It's what fandom you're a part of or what hobby you prefer. Maybe you'll be in the NFL region versus the Marvel region or something of that sort. And it does try to, I go on it. It's a little bit of a disconnected tangent, but it does show that we are at a point where, when people talk about the Civil War concept and all this type of things, it's not how people imagine them. It's not about this bold right wing just striking out and having this tremendous power that's been stored up. Most of this talk is about making the federal government and the people in charge so hysterical, or rather their supporters so hysterical that they will back tyranny against their perceived enemy rather than there being a real civil war threat or a real threat to democracy. Is that all this is a meme to sucker in people into supporting greater tyranny from the government and more crackdown, less free speech, less First Amendment rights, less Second Amendment rights, all those type of things that is associated with. And so people shouldn't go along, hell yeah, liberals believe in civil war too. Most of them know that it's not. They know that this is a meme. They know that they're exploiting this to gain more power. That's why John Meacham is writing this. He is a Biden advisor. He is writing what the president thinks or what people in the White House may think, and that they want to emulate Lincoln's example. And the example they want to emulate is his tyranny, not, but it'll be occluded with his love of equality and liberty. And that's really what they want to go for. So I think it's more about resisting that tyranny, resisting that government crackdown than, about talking about some far off fantasy ideas or imagining that you're going to be in the new Confederacy or what have you in the second Civil War. That's not where we're going towards. It's this. I don't think they're genuinely concerned that there's going to be a movement for separation. They're just hyping up their own base to make them fear that, so they will be more supportive of the tyrannical measures that they want to enforce. So that's my thoughts on that topic. Now moving on to the topic of forgiveness, is that there was a very sad story from Georgia, really horrible story, is that there was this football phenom named Elijah DeWitt who looks like he could be his own type of Giga Chad. He had an extremely strong face, clearly an athlete, very gifted athlete. And he was murdered outside of a Dave and Buster's in Georgia by two black kids. And, well, they're not even kids. They're both older than him. They're both adults. So two black men. And they, terrible story at all, that this man who had a lot of potential in him had his life taken away over, a petty robbery. And so it's like a terrible story. It really shows like the type of behavior we have to deal with in America now, that you can be doing all these great things in life. You can be, and he was on a date with his girlfriend, and he's, out, enjoying his youth. And then, he walks outside, and these two guys like try to, demand something from him. I believe he tried to fight him off, and, he's a big athlete, so he could probably take them on. And they shot him, killed him, whole life taken away, whole family ruined. And you see it's something terrible. And when we've seen many of these incidents that's happened with police shootings towards black men who didn't have the type of promise that Elijah DeWitt had, they were not, all-star athletes, who had their whole life ahead of them. Many of them are career criminals who are high on drugs and doing all types of terrible things, and were engaged in a crime before a police officer shot them. But then we treat this as like a police officer shot the guy who was about to cure cancer, and this is an unspeakable tragedy, one of the worst things that ever happened, that this would dare happen, and this is a cause for riots and mass changes in American society due to this. And when you see that all the time, that those come to dominate, that those stories come to dominate all the time, or if there's even like a white guy who may try to, do a mass shooting or something, and some of the people he kills are minorities or what have you, whatever type of stories that the media gloms onto, they turn this stuff into just unspeakable tragedy, especially with the police shootings that you're supposed to concern with. Now with the DeWitt story, we're just supposed to move on. And unfortunately, the family shares that. Now, we cannot, fully attack the family because they're dealing with a lot of grief. And, it's hard to say, like, when a loved one dies, how you would react. And how they are reacting is going along with the script that they want us to react when something like this happens to one of us. And that they've gone and they've said, we immediately forgive the killers. We want to move on. We don't want hate in our household. And that's even what the girlfriend said. It's like Elijah would have wanted us to move on and to not dwell on this. And you're just thinking, well, considering how the social revolutions happen after any black criminal gets shot by police. I mean, there was just a news story where some black teenager pointed a gun at police, and I believe he was about to fire, or he may have even gotten shots off and he was shot. And it's in Mississippi, and the family's already hired Ben Crump. He's out there, talking about how this is a horrible tragedy. This should have never happened. And you're supposed to have made, and CNN and all these places are covering it as like the worst story ever. And you're like thinking, it's like, okay, so let me get this straight. When, a promising young white guy who's like really got a great future ahead of him, he's a football star, and he gets murdered in a senseless robbery. You don't even say it's a robbery gone wrong, because like, when is a robbery supposed to go right? And a robbery, his life's taken away, and you're just supposed to kind of accept it. It's like a tornado hitting you. It's like, well, what can you do? We're forgiving these black kids who didn't even seem to ask for forgiveness or have not shown any type of contrition, which has gone into this debate that a lot of people on the right, particularly trads and some people who really like to emphasize that they're devout Christians, were emphasizing that point. We'll get to that in a moment. But you're supposed to immediately forgive them and move on. It's something that you just can't do anything about. But if your, loved one happens to be an armed criminal of a different color, and he, gets in a fight with police, and he, doesn't and loses his life as a result, you are supposed to treat this as the latest Emmett Till situation, as something that you need to go protest and say that never again shall this happen. And it's horrific that this can happen in our country. While, you're not even supposed to say that it's horrific that can happen. The Elijah DeWitt murder can happen in this country. It's just like a hurricane hitting. It's a natural occurrence that you can't do anything about. And the only thing you can do is just to forgive and forget, as like the family said. And the most important thing is to not allow hate in your heart when there is there. And that's not even done with, none of these, the George Floyd family did not forgive Derek Chauvin. They wanted as much punishment as possible. And now if anyone even dares criticize George Floyd, they threaten to sue. I mean, they're threatening to sue Kanye West for saying he died of a fentanyl overdose rather than, the result of what Derek Chauvin did. They didn't show any forgiveness at all towards Derek Chauvin. It was the same with the Ahmaud Arbery trial. The Ahmaud Arbery trial is even worse, is that the family, not only did they want a murder conviction, but they wanted to ensure that they stayed in state prison, not going to federal prison, because they knew that black prisoners in the state prison would give these guys a much harder time if they were there. And they didn't want to offer that kind of mere concession that I will forgive them. The Ahmaud Arbery, and the media supported this. Like, way to go, powerful family. Don't forgive them at all. Want maximum punishment as possible for them, and we want to view them as evil and villainous, that they are unworthy of any type of forgiveness or redemption for what they did. And it's the same with Chauvin and all these others. Like, there is no presumption that the black family should forgive any of these type of people. As even in the case with one of the guys who got shot in like a year after George Floyd, it was Dante Wright, I think it was the name. It was like the family there was outraged, also offered no forgiveness to the officer, even though the officer was actually asking for forgiveness in that case. She did admit a degree of guilt, and the family refused it, and they wanted the harshest punishment possible for what that white female officer did. And so it's like a completely different situation, is that there is no expectation that you're supposed to forgive, but for the whites you immediately have to forgive, otherwise they're gonna be like, why are you dwelling on this? Why are you keep focusing in on this? And going to the point about, like, a lot of people were saying, well, this is like the true Christian thing to do, is that this is what you happen, is that the thing with like true, for a lot of the Christian like acts of forgiveness, is that you have to ask for forgiveness. You have to confess. You have to say, what I did was wrong. Will you forgive me? I mean, that's like the point of confession. Is like within the Catholic Church, is that you go, you said, I did things wrong. I'm begging for forgiveness. Here in this case, the black kids probably have not shown any contrition yet. You haven't even heard their story. They may even be celebrating that they killed this guy. There are examples of, these black killers and stuff who just like totally have a completely unapologetic attitude. There's this really outrageous case in New York where this black guy beat the living crap out of this poor Hispanic woman who simply just ignored his advances, and he, beat her horribly on camera and at one of these subway stations. And the I think it was the New York Daily News, not the New York Post, interviewed him, and he was completely unapologetic. He blamed the woman for the crime, said that, she was rude to him, and he wasn't trying to kill her because he would have really made sure to kill her if he had tried that. And there's not an apologetic attitude at all. And so, imagine if those killers just have that. It's like, yeah, it's Elijah's fault. He should have just handed over the money or something. It's like, I don't seek forgiveness at all. And there's always this desire to go out and forgive. There was a story about a older woman who's now in like her 60s or 70s who has done all this work for the killer of her father, who her father was like a elderly man in the 90s. I think he was like in the 60s or 70s, who was like murdered by a black guy, coming in and trying to rob him. And he's like pulling out of the driveway. And in this story, the black guy doesn't even like admit any wrong. He just keeps saying that there was like another gunman, and he's not even really forgiving or anything. And this woman is going out of her way to help this guy and like say like, oh, he's a victim of the system. It's like so bad. And the guy won't even admit he's wrong. And yet this woman does this. And there's a couple of other examples. There's the Molly Tibbetts murder, where the family then became the strongest advocate of the killer because they were worried that he'd be used to promote xenophobia and racism. Both the father and mother of Molly Tibbetts came out to defend the Hispanic community and their great tacos that they make, and how you shouldn't connect the death of their daughter to any larger policy decisions. Completely different from what black victims of police shootings do. And that we should really move on. And there was even a story where the mother adopted like a friend of, or took in, I don't know if formally adopted, but was like taking in like a friend of the killer. And the friend was trying to convince the mother to sympathize with the killer. And in the article, she's like, yeah, I could see where it's coming. And this is like, and the media is like cooing and cawing, like, oh, this is what whites should do. They should love their daughter's killer. And it's like, why? And this guy, once again, didn't show any remorse. He didn't even admit he did the killing. He claimed that a bunch of whites like kidnapped him and then blamed him for the shooting when he had no role in it. And there were like, in like liberal media outlets like, this seems like a believable story. And it's like, no, it's not. It's like this illegal immigrant's just trying to get his way out of it. I was surprised the family didn't believe that because they're so loving of this guy. And there's another story of a German girl who was raped and murdered by a migrant, and then the family donated to migrant aid agencies. And this is just what you're supposed to do. You're just supposed to completely, turn the other cheek when there's not, when it's just going to invite even more persecution and harshness down to it. Now, if the killers of Elijah DeWitt said, we did something very bad, we know that our actions will never bring back your loved one, we fully accept guilt for this, and then the family said, we forgive you. That is one thing. I think that's like a fair thing to do, is to say, these guys show contrition, and then you forgive them in the process. But there is no act of contrition on their part. And you could still say, well, they don't need to make any contrition to forgive them. Well, okay, that may be the case, but it's also setting an example that you're just supposed to accept these murders of your loved one and treat them as natural disasters, when there's actual policies that you can advocate for to make sure that these things don't happen to other people. And by your forgiveness, you are encouraging further evil acts against others and setting a horrible example for others. It's not like saying you should go, these guys should go and just say, go on a hateful tirade on TV over this. They should show some control, but they should say, I want justice, and I also would like to look at what policies led to the death of my loved one to ensure that that doesn't happen to another family. And that's like the better option than just going straight to hate has no home here, we're forgiven. And the family of themselves were probably like conservative evangelicals. They probably were Trump supporters. But this is just the go-to for these people because of media brainwashing that tells whites that this is what you have to do when something bad happens to you from non-whites, is that you're supposed to forgive and forget and move on, and not to look into any policies that could prevent this from happening to others. And as I said, I think the forgiveness angle, it would be if the killers turned themselves in, they said, we did this, we're sorry, we can never take back what it is. If they show contrition and they admit a guilt, then I think it's more than it's right for the family to forgive them in that act, but they have to show the act of contrition, and there's no act of contrition there. And so it's just ridiculous. I don't think it has anything to do with religion. It's just more about how whites are browbeaten into accepting these terrible things happening to them, and that their one recourse is that the media will give them a pat on the back for forgiving their loved ones' killers, just by forgiving and forgetting, because that's what they want us to do. They want us to forgive and forget. But any wrong actions that we do, there is no forgiveness and there is no forgetting. Just look at what happened to Derek Chauvin. Look at what happened to the McMichaels in the Ahmaud Arbery case. Look at what happened to any of these police officers involved in that. Look at even what happened to Kyle Rittenhouse. There's no forget. Well, I mean, that's like a bit of a different example, but there's no forgiveness for whites who may do this, or police officers who may do this against minorities. Absolutely none. And there's no forgetting, and those families immediately unleash their rage against the system and demanding action. There's no forgiveness there. And I'm not saying you should fully emulate that, but you should look at that example and resist the temptation to forgive just for media plaudits or feeling that that's the right thing to do. Now on to another favorite topic of mine, and that is Ron DeSantis, Heavy D. We all talked about his, the Martha's Vineyard stunt got a lot of attention when that happened about a month ago. Exactly a month ago, actually. And everyone's talking about how this is the most brilliant move a Republican governor has done. Like, no one else has effectively used state power to punish his enemies and reward his friends. Like, this is the first time in human history that someone has realized the awesome power that comes with wielding the state for your own interests. And this was like all Republicans spent a whole week soy jacking over it, acting like the Martha's Vineyard stunt, sending 50 migrants there was a huge deal. Now, at the time, I was like, look, it's not going to make liberals like suddenly concede their hypocrisy. They doubled down on it. They genuinely believe this stuff. As I always want to emphasize, they genuinely believe this stuff. They will welcome migrants with open arms as long as they have the means to do this. And they were only sent 50. They sent them on their way, and none of their ideological presuppositions were challenged at all by this. But it did bring attention to some of the problems of the border. I think, as I always argued, I think what Texas and Arizona were doing are more effective because they're actually taking migrants from their states, from rural towns in their states that vote heavily Republican, that don't have the resources to take care of these migrants, and they're plucking them from there and taking them to sanctuary cities and flooding those sanctuary cities with those migrants. I always said that was more effective, but I said, as long as it brings attention to immigration, whatever. But, DeSantis, despite doing the most brilliant political act in recent memory, he didn't follow up with his migrant flights. In fact, he was supposed to send migrant flights to Delaware to Joe Biden's home, and those were suddenly canceled for no reason. And this is long before the hurricane, because I keep hearing this argument, when I ask, like, why hasn't he done any of these follow-up flights on the migrants? And they're like, well, he has a hurricane. And it's, well, I mean, that's true, but he was doing these migrant flights like at least 2 weeks before, and he had ones planned to do that. And there's a new report coming out that he had much more flights planned besides the one in Delaware, but they were all scrapped. And it wasn't due just the hurricane. They scrapped everything immediately. Why? Because there was pushback. Because he got sued, and there was, the sheriff pursuing criminal investigation against him. And the feds are even looking into this. I don't think he has to worry that much about criminal investigation, but the lawsuit they may have to worry about. And the latest news of this stunt, as it shows that it's not going the way that DeSantis intended, those migrants are now on the pathway to citizenship because they're claiming that they're victims of crimes, and they're going to get this special visa that is given to migrants who are victims of an alleged crime. And they're claiming that they were victims of some type of kidnapping or whatever. Obviously, it's not, but they're going to do this. So the end result of this is a meaningless stunt that stole credit from Greg Abbott and Doug Ducey of Arizona, and said that this was like the only thing, and it's like get all conservative media hyped up and saying that we have destroyed liberal hypocrisy once and for all. And the end result of this is DeSantis wasting taxpayer dollars on a stunt, having to get sued over it, having to get criminal investigation over it, and the end result is these migrants are now going to be permanently in the country. I mean, you could say that they were already going to be, but they were not going to get on a pathway to citizenship, and there was still a chance of deporting them. Likely that chance is gone now, thanks to the notoriety, and no liberal changed their opinion. Now, they're trying to claim that there is a victory because the Biden administration is now doing a type of remain in Mexico, but just for Venezuelans, is that Mexico would have to take back these Venezuelans that have come through. And they're saying that this is all due to DeSantis. Really, it's due to the weight and burden that New York City, Chicago, and D.C. are feeling from Texas and Arizona sending their migrants there. And that's really what's coming from, is that these mayors have been begging Biden to do something, and Biden realizes he has to do something because these mayors are very powerful mayors, that Biden has to listen to. And one of the places is where Biden's living right now, and that they say we don't have the resources to take these illegals. You really have to do something. And this is it. But it's a half measure, too, because at the same time, he's planning to offer asylum to especially qualified Venezuelans. And this type of asylum may also be applied to Haitians, Nicaraguans, Cubans, and I think maybe one other group, is that this may even be expanded beyond them. So they're still welcoming a lot of these Venezuelan migrants who are coming up. And it's nice that he's doing some type of remain in Mexico, which remain in Mexico, what happened is that all these people who plead for asylum is that they would have to wait in Mexico or outside the country as their asylum application is processed. But with that gone, now all these illegals who claim, oh, I'm seeking asylum, why? Honduras is a shithole. And they're like, oh, that's a credible reason. Well, you can stay in the country as we process your asylum application. And oh, by the way, we're not going to deport you unless you rape or murder someone. Like, all right, great. And so none of these people get effectively amnesty as is. I mean, maybe if their application process is denied, they would do that. But at the same time, we're saying we're not going to deport any illegal immigrant unless they commit a serious crime. So as long as this person doesn't rape or murder anyone, and he could probably drive drunk, drunk driving is not a cause for deportation anymore, and do a whole host of crimes and still stay in the country. So I haven't really changed that, but I mean, it is nice that they're at least doing something. But I would credit that more to Abbott and Doug Ducey than to Ron DeSantis, Ron DeSantis made them more committed to this as the fact that they're trying to give them a pathway to citizenship and get them on these special visas, and they're using resources to investigate and go after DeSantis with it. And all of the arguments for the failed stunt are completely stupid. One, though, it's not stupid to say DeSantis had an effect. It's just wrong. But it's not stupid. It's just wrong. And it's not correct. It's more Abbott than them. But the other ones are just completely stupid. One is to say it exposed liberal hypocrisy. You know what? The entirety of conservative media is dedicated to that proposition. DeSantis could have just sent a damn tweet. He didn't need to waste millions of dollars just to do this Martha's Vineyard stunt. And no, it didn't expose liberal hypocrisy at all. Liberals are still committed to their ideas. They're still committed to their insane ideas after this effect. There is no change in that. They aren't like, wow, we realize we're hypocrites now. I guess we're going to start deporting migrants. No, they did not get that. And that's stupid. So you wasted all this effort, and it's like this huge expression of state power or what have you, and it's just done to expose liberal hypocrisy. And then when liberal hypocrisy wasn't exposed, they're giving them on a pathway to citizenship. They're doubling down on it. Way to go. So that's stupid. And then the more favorite is just to attack Trump, this is the common tactic with, if you ever make any type of criticism of Ron DeSantis, they immediately go straight to Trump because they have no other argument. And so they'll say like, well, where's the wall? Well, where's the deportation from Trump? No, you know what? Trump did way more as president than DeSantis did. DeSantis did as governor. DeSantis has done good things. Like DeSantis, I like to stop woke act. But you know something else about the Stop Woke Act? Is that Trump had an executive order that's very similar to the Stop Woke Act that tried to eliminate these diversity and critical race theory indoctrination in government trainings and among government contractors. Trump did the same thing in office, but no one gives him any credit for that. Trump reduced legal immigration through executive action, but no one gives him credit for that. Trump took money from the Pentagon and sent it to the border to shore up border defenses. And guess what? Illegal immigration was nowhere near the rate it is right now because Trump was enforcing immigration law and was putting in policies like Remain in Mexico that kept dubious asylum seekers, illegal immigrants who are just saying, oh, my country's a shithole. I need to stay in America. He said, no, you're staying out of America while your asylum application is processed. That reduced illegal immigration. He did a bunch of other things. And at the same time, he had to deal with being investigated by the FBI throughout his entire presidency over stupid charges over Russiagate and then Ukraine phone call. And they were always trying to, stymie him everything. And he had terrible choices of personnel because all these conservative establishment was hostile to him and didn't want to work in his administration. We're always trying to undermine him. Meanwhile, the same conservative establishment that hated Trump, declared their hatred for Trump in the 2016 primary, loves DeSantis. Like National Review loves DeSantis. Paul Ryan's top choice for president is Ron DeSantis. Somehow this grand threat. Like, why would Paul Ryan, who represents everything that populists claims they hate, love the Populist Inc.'s favorite candidate for president? That doesn't make any sense, does it? Actually, it does if you realize that Ron DeSantis is not that different from classic conservatism. He's not. DeSantis and a lot of other things that are happening represents conservating, just subsuming populist thing, adopting some of the rhetoric, some of their tactics, some of their talking points, and then, but it's now within the framework of classic conservatism. It is not outside of that framework. It is not an alternative to it. It's not replacing it. It's merely adopting some of its traits and rhetoric in order to look more appealing in our contemporary world and our contemporary political situation. And so these people just go straight to Trump, because that's the only argument that they have. And they blame Trump for everything. And then all these people celebrated all of Trump's bad hires. They even want to complain about Christopher Wray. All these people were celebrating Christopher Wray getting hired because he wasn't, he replaced the terrible FBI director before him. And that was James Comey, of course. And so they went through every personnel decision. And the personnel problem would be the same with DeSantis as it is with Trump. And I think one thing that I know that is a result for the Martha's Vineyard thing is the complete loyalty of conservative media to Ron DeSantis to a level that I've never seen for a politician. Even when Trump was president in 2018, when conservative media had to grudgingly support Trump and cheer him on, they were still willing to publish criticism of him. Even though their audience didn't like it, they would still do that. They would still say, this is too far, like a shithole country's comment, other things. They would say, oh, well, we can't defend this. We don't want to defend this. But with DeSantis, I have not seen this level of loyalty and just zeal in defending him since George W. Bush's first term in office, where all the conservative media just treated George W. Bush as their great champion, were hostile to any criticism of him, would just shout down and attack any conservatives who may criticize Ron DeSantis. It's very much like how first term George W. Bush was, up until probably even 2006. After 2006, people were more willing to criticize Bush. But for most of his time as president, all of Conservative Inc. is zealously loyal to George W. Bush. And even presidential candidates that Conservative Inc. liked more than Trump, like Romney and McCain, didn't get this type of fealty and loyalty and zeal from conservative media as Ron DeSantis does. And this makes it, and it's funny when, all these people, populist types, who are maybe not at the forefront of conservative media, think that they're going to get, being the ringleader of a DeSantis administration. No, it's going to be the same people who've always controlled Conservative Inc. who are going to be there. So this is a taste of what will life on the right be like without Trump. It'll just be, complete loyalty pledges to DeSantis, pretending that his latest stunt is the greatest political act in human history, and that's it. And DeSantis compared to a lot of Republicans is great, and I don't like to hate on DeSantis too much, but I have to, because somebody has to. I'm the one voice brave enough to do it, to really point out that DeSantis isn't all he's cracked up to be. But even the Martha's Vineyard stunt really shows a lot of what DeSantis is. It's a lot of kind of bluster and then no action, and then all conservative media, once they've ignored it, they completely don't acknowledge what happened. It's a similar thing happened with his tech bill. His tech bill didn't solve the problem at all. It was just complete PR stunt. It got knocked down in court, and conservatives have not talked about it since it was introduced. They didn't talk about it after it got knocked down, but all of them say is well, unlike Trump, he did something about tech. Is actually Trump had some executive orders to make the FCC review whether big tech were upholding, Section 230 that requires them to be neutral political forums. That was much more consequential than anything than DeSantis' stupid bill that was shot down in court anyway. But there is a hilarious clip that I love, is that Dave Rubin and Megyn Kelly, Dave Rubin's interviewing Megyn Kelly. He's like, well, what do you think about DeSantis Trump? I think DeSantis would really do well on the debate stage. And Megyn Kelly gets a cold dose of facts, just cold, hard facts and logic. She's saying that the only way DeSantis can win is if Trump doesn't run and endorses him, or Trump dies. And then Rubin's like, well, I think on the debate stage, DeSantis could really show him up. And then like she's like, no, he can't. Is that Trump sucks up all the energy in a room and no one can compete against that. And this is somebody who knows Trump very well. She moderated debates in 2016. She famously had a spat with Trump throughout the 2016 primary. She is well aware of the Trump phenomenon. And then she's like, these Trump fans are fanatically loyal to Trump, and if Trump is not the nominee, they may not even turn up for 2024. And Dave Rubin's like, well, I guess that might be the case. He's like such an idiot. It's like DeSantis stands only really have like, what about Trump? Just getting mad, being irrational, being betas and being, just like this, just like complaining about Trump and like insisting that reality will fit their fantasy. And it's like with DeSantis. DeSantis is like a decent politician, but he suffers from charisma. From a lack of charisma. I mean, the fact that Biden upstaged him when they were out in Florida together, touring the hurricane damage, the fact that, if he was on a stage with Trump, he imitates Trump's mannerisms, and Trump knows how to get under people's skin. And DeSantis would not know how to think on his feet, would not know how to go to deal with Trump's attacks, and he would lose it. And he would probably even mock him for imitating him. And he's like, look at you. You're doing all my mannerisms. You're not me. You're a phony. And like, what would DeSantis have to say to that? All he would have to do is call him little d, and it would probably be over for heavy D. So I was all saying that. I think, moving aside from DeSantis, I think when it comes to these actions like Martha's Vineyard stunt and making liberals own up to their hypocrisy, that's not going to work unless there's a real cost to them, like it is happening in D.C., New York, where they don't have homeless shelters for them. They don't have the type of money and resources for them, where it actually inflicts pain on them. That's the only way it's going to change. But if there's just like, oh, here's like a Photoshop we're doing, this really owns you. No, it's not going to change their opinions at all. Only the type of action that Texas is doing is actually going to make that the case. And it's like, exposing liberal hypocrisy, that's all like conservatives do. And, supposedly we're supposed to use state power to stop, focusing on that and actually do things. And all DeSantis did was the same old stuff conservatives have done. And I think the results of the Martha's Vineyard thing should really make people realize they were wrong to go full on into the simping for DeSantis and feeling like this is the greatest thing to ever happen, and to understand that, DeSantis is not Caesar. And I think people need to understand that he's not the caudillo, and trying to make believe he is not productive. So that's it for those topics. Now on to the Cognitive Elite questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions if you sign up for the Cognitive Elite option at Highly Respected Substack, and that's at highlyrespected.substack.com. And if you haven't already, make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements while you're there. And the first question comes from Dan. Dan was actually very concerned that I had violated the Greer pledge by watching college football this weekend. And this is a hard-hitting question because I do realize that in the Greer pledge it says I will not watch the NFL and I will watch college football. But if you look at the wording, NFL is not college football, so you should not be too upset. College football and other sports are allowed to be watched under the Greer pledge. It's only specifically the NFL. So I did not violate the Greer pledge, but it was a funny experience watching it because it is a grass touching moment that is not as bad. Like a lot of the grass touching moments you'll have is like go out and look at people, and you'll go to your like local mall and like, you know what? I'll go back to touching keyboard. Like this is much better. Like this is horrifying going out, but like actually going to a decent sports bar, watching college football, and having some beer, having some wings, having some pizza, it's actually a pretty good time. But I can understand why, I can understand why people do this, because it is like fun, enjoyable. You're not focused on anything going on in the world. Like it's just like I hope the team wins, and you feel good if your team wins. And so a lot of people get into this stuff, but it's like once you understand that like this is how what most motivates people. Like I think when ESPN was doing College Game Day at Knoxville with before the UT Alabama game, there was thousands of people engaging one of the tweets over Peyton Manning being the guest picker. And people were upset about it, or UT fans were, which is weird because, Peyton Manning's a UT legend, is that, there's apparently some Peyton Manning curses that they're never going to win a games or national title if Peyton Manning is there because he never won a national title when he was with UT. But they're a really good team. They came close a few years. They just had some key losses in the regular season that did it. Or otherwise, other people were arguing that they wanted Morgan Wallen, who's the country singer, famously got canceled for saying the N-word and then got uncanceled, has been successfully uncanceled afterwards. They wanted him as the guest picker. And so these people are just like, getting really worked up and energetic over this game. And I even had friends in Tennessee who were telling me about how nervous they were waking up before the game and stuff. And it's like, these are people that are no longer in college. They're, of course, not on the UT football team. And they're just really worked up about it. And once you see that this is like that these games like generate more interest and attention and like energy than even a lot of the politics, I do think that it undermines a lot of the silly notions that a lot of right-wing Twitter gets into about social collapse happening, civil war on the horizon, national divorce. Is like really what all these young people's energies is directed towards is charging the field and tearing down the goalposts if their team has a huge upset or has a huge victory, as it happened in Knoxville last weekend. And it's worth, I really say it's worth touching grass just to see what America's like. I don't think it makes you superior to other people. Like I've been noticing this normie signaling that I see a lot on fringe politics Twitter. It's not just right-wing Twitter. Leftists really engage in normie signaling, which is like weird. It'll be like a transgender person with like the 18 mark on their bio. Like apparently there's like some porn or something that I don't know. Whenever you see that like the 18 emoji on there, you're like, this is an account you don't want to deal with. And it's like furry and stuff. And they're just talking about how normie they are. And these like incel chuds are just not normie like them, or just these weird leftists who are talking about how normie they are for watching NFL with them friends. And you're just like, this is so weird. And then it's like on fringe politics Twitter, like everyone on right wing is like, I'm normie, you're not. You're the abnormal person. Is like, I'm the real normie, and you just don't understand being normie because I'm normie. And like people are just arguing over who's the most normie. And it's like, as I say, if you're an avid poster on Twitter, you are not a normie in the specific sense of the term. You are a little bit different. There's nothing wrong with being a little bit different, but I think it is odd like how all these people go back and forth over who's most normie. And if you ever knew the background of some of these people, they're not normal at all. But they just grasp onto anything that they can claim to a sense of normalcy, to own the hypothetical like chud racist incel who's a shut-in, who's just not normal. Like the only people who I like, the people on fringe politics Twitter who don't try to normie signal, because there's like so many people. Like I even remember like these weird ass wignats who would like try to claim that they're normie, and they had like the most idiotic internet poison ideology that they have. Like they would just like say like, I'm a white anti-colonialist Bolshevik, and it's like, what the hell is that? Like nobody knows what the hell you're talking about. You are not normal if you say this, and these people would just like gravitate towards it. So, but also all these normal people, I was like, oh yeah, by the way, revolution's on the horizon. It's like, if you're actually normal, you would realize that no, it's not at all. Like these people are just, they're glued into the game. They're having a fun time. It's not like there's anything wrong with like having a hobby or stuff. But it does, like sports does, even though I like college football and I say that's one of the okay sports to watch, it's really just NFL. I don't want people watching. I don't think I have to worry about NBA, any of the people I talk to watching the NBA. But when it comes to these, it really does create, I don't know, I wouldn't say regime loyalty, but content with the contentment with the regime. And I mean, it's like people need to have fun. They need to have their their release, their hobby. I would just say that you have to limit that. As the Greer had pledged, is like no weed, no pit bulls, no Marvel movies, no rap, and no NFL. If you could just do those 5 things, there are plenty of other options. There are plenty of other hobbies and interests to have besides those 5 things. If you can do those things, it's a massive improvement. But it is worthwhile to touch grass from time to time to realize the actual state of this country, which, believe it or not, Twitter does not accurately represent. The final question comes from Johnny Chungus. Once again, seeing Johnny Chungus. He asks, Scott, what are your thoughts? He's saying, thoughts on the J6 committee trying to subpoena Trump. Apparently it expires after JOP takes over Congress. Is this a meaningless stunt? I don't think it's a meaningless stunt. They really do want to get him before Congress. And maybe they think that they can maybe really amp up the pressure on him. I mean, the January 6th committee wants to recommend an indictment for Trump for over J6, and they're just trying to put more pressure on this and punish Trump more. And it's also to reward their Democratic base. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's a meaningless stunt because they want teeth behind it. I mean, they've been able to punish people for refusing subpoenas before, like Steve Bannon, and I think like 1 or 2 other people. So there is like actual teeth behind it. And maybe they're just trying to exert more pressure on the DOJ to do something, or they think that it's worth a shot. We'll get them to before the hearing. And also their fan base, the January 6th fan base, wants this, and they're rewarding their fan base. So it's more of it has more meaning than the Martha's Vineyard stunt. I'll say that. But there's some other thoughts I want to go into about the indictment. I read a pretty good article in the Atlantic about Merrick Garland, and the article concluded, it interviewed people, Garland himself and people who worked with Garland. Garland did not give any indication of whether he would indict Trump, but the article concludes, and this is like a thoroughly vetted article with interviewing Garland, and it says that Garland is probably going to indict Trump. But I think one thing is actually reading the article is that I'm less convinced they're going to try to go with sedition charges. They're just going to go on the obstruction of justice or something dealing with the documents, because I don't think Garland wants to go the full route of sedition, because Garland does suck. I want to say this, but we are probably fortunate in that Garland is the DOJ. I don't know if we want to say we're fortunate, but I could imagine someone who is far worse than him as DOJ. And even look at some of the people just under him, like Vanita Gupta, the Kristen Clark, who believes that blacks are biologically superior to whites. Like the people below him who are also appointed are just absolutely horrific. Terrible. It is a nightmare that they have any position of authority, yet these are the people there. And Garland really does want to do things by the book. He does not want to appear too out of line or biased or doing hack political work. I don't want to defend Merrick Garland too much, but I think he fears the prospect of what may happen to the country if they try to do a sedition trial. And I don't think he feels he has the goods on Trump to actually get a conviction in it, which I think he might be more confident in a conviction over the indictment. I think with a sedition, it's I don't even know if the sedition thing is going to work with the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and that thing. And that's not dealing with Trump. I think if they really want him dead to rights, or as close as they can get to dead to rights on a crime, and just something that they can say, look, this is it. And they also don't want to really test the framework of our government and country, whether we can survive something like that. And I think he does worry that, and the liberals that I think this is an unjust a fear that they shouldn't have. But liberals do really think that there's going to, when they indict Trump, that there's going to be J6s all over the country. I argue that's not going to be the case for a variety of reasons. But they really do believe this. But even if they did indict Trump on sedition, that would be such an escalation, much more even so than any type of indictment over obstruction. Like, there'd be a way that, like, our country, like, and people could accept it. It would still test a lot of America's stability and people's commitment to the institutions. But a sedition would be an additional step to that, an even further escalation. And I don't think that they have as solid of evidence on that. Not like, and I'm not like saying that like his stuff dealing with his documents is a real crime. I think this is clearly a political move, but by what the standards they have, I think that they could try to get a better conviction than with sedition. Because I don't even know what the sedition, I don't even know what that would be, and it's like a broad law. I don't think he wants to really test the government. It's been hard. It's been hard to get people convicted on sedition before. They've tried it several times. They tried to do it in World War II against a bunch of far right people who were opposed to the war and had connections to the Axis. That failed. They tried to do a sedition trial against a bunch of people who were in the white nationalist movement in the 80s. I think it was a Fort Smith trial, one of the forts, and that failed. It blew up in their face. And I think it's going to be very difficult to try to do that against a president. And if it failed, I don't think Garland wants to risk failure here. And I think he would be more confident. He knows he has to indict because he cannot go up there and tell like the American people, like, I'm not doing an indictment. Like, he would become the greatest traitor to the left in recent memory. They would all hate him. He would have to be removed from office if he did that, and his life and legacy would be ruined. They want a sedition indictment, but they'll be content with any type of indictment they have. So he's going to do something, but I think he's going to try to go on the lesser charge to better fortify his case and to better fortify what they feel that might be the threat to our democracy, as we talked about before at the beginning of the podcast. So that's something to think about. I don't think, once again, this is not like, some people were accusing me of dropping black pills that Trump's going to be indicted. I don't think it's a black pill. I think it also could be an interesting thing. I think Trump is going to be more committed to running for president under indictment. The only thing that I think of that might prevent him is the cost of it. One thing is the Republican Party's been paying his legal bills for most of his time. And if he runs for president, the Republican Party is apparently not going to pay for his legal bills anymore, nor can his super PAC pay for his legal bills. He's going to be having to pay his legal bills on his own. And Trump, as people all should know, doesn't like to pay for anything that he doesn't have to. And that may become a factor in what he is going to run, but it may, he may put it off longer if he feels that, over the legal bill situation. So there's things, but he is going to run. Him running with an indictment hanging over his head or a possible indictment, that is going to make him have stronger support among Republican voters. It's going to solidify his control over the Republican Party, and it's going to move the Republican Party in a much more positive direction where they're no longer simping for the FBI and the deep state and all these institutions that are now hostile to middle America. And it's just an acceleration. And also think about this. Think about him beating the charges and then him going on to win the presidency. That would be such a huge and epic victory that I just can't even think of like what would happen, like all the great things that could happen to that. So that might not be the most likely scenario, but it's a possible scenario, and it would be a massive white pill to happen. So I don't want to think of people being on the black pill side of things. It's just seeing reality as it is and going from there. So those are my concluding thoughts on today's episode. We're going to, of course, have another incredible IQ supplement. I know you guys can't believe it, but we're going to have an incredible IQ supplement later this week. So tune in for that. So until next time, stay respected.